I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee I couldn't afford, when Diane dropped the words that changed everything. She said it so casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt. "You're old enough now, Emily. It's time you start paying rent if you want to keep living here." Her voice was calm, but the message cut deep. My father had only been gone a few months. I was still trying to hold myself together, still waking up expecting to hear his voice in the mornings. This house wasn't just a building to me, it was the only piece of him I had left. I looked up at her, hoping she was joking, but Diane didn't flinch. She stood there in her silk robe, sipping her tea, like she hadn't just shattered what little piece I had left. I wanted to remind her that this was my father's house, that I'd lived here long before she came along. But I swallowed the words. I didn't want another fight. After Dad's funeral, Diane had changed overnight. The warmth she showed during his illness vanished. She stopped cooking dinner, stopped asking how I was doing, and started locking doors that had never been locked before. Even my father's office, a place where we used to sit together and read, was off limits now. I got a job at a diner just to make ends meet. Every dollar I earned went toward the rent Diane demanded. It didn't feel right, paying to live in the house my father built, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. My friends offered me couches, but pride kept me here. I kept telling myself I just needed time, that Diane was grieving too, that maybe one day we'd find a way to understand each other. But every time I looked at her, I saw nothing but coldness. She redecorated the house, replaced my father's old leather chair with something modern and white, threw out his favorite rug, and hung new family pictures that didn't include me. It was like she was trying to erase every trace of him. One night, I overheard her on the phone, laughing softly. "Once the house sells, we'll be set," she said. My chest tightened. Sell? I couldn't breathe for a moment. The next day, she told me to start packing my things, just in case. That's when something inside me changed. The sadness that had followed me for months began turning into something stronger, determination. I realized that whatever Diane was planning, it wasn't just about rent. It was about taking away the last thing my father left me. I didn't say a word to her that day. I just smiled, nodded, and went back to my room. But deep down, I made myself a promise. If she thought she could take everything from me, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. Emily's days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. At 22, she was juggling 2 part-time jobs, mornings at the diner and evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store. Every paycheck barely covered food, gas, and the rent Diane demanded. The house that once smelled of her dad's coffee and old books now felt cold and strained. Diane had changed everything. The walls that once held family photos, pictures of Emily's childhood birthdays, her dad's fishing trips, their goofy smiles, were now covered with fancy frames of Diane and her son Jake posing in matching outfits. It was like her father's life had been erased, and Emily's memories had been replaced with someone else's. One afternoon, Emily came home from work and found the door to her father's study locked. She turned the handle twice, but it wouldn't budge. Her father had always kept that room open. It was filled with his notes, letters, and the scent of his cologne. It was where he used to read to her on rainy days. Now it was sealed off like a secret. When Emily asked Diane about it, she snapped, "That room's full of old junk. I don't want you in there." Her tone was sharp, leaving no room for argument. Emily wanted to push back, but she was too tired to fight. She simply nodded and walked away, though inside, something didn't sit right. Over dinner that night, Emily mentioned her father's will, trying to sound casual. "Dad told me once that he made sure the house would always belong to family," she said carefully. Diane's fork froze midair. "That's none of your business," she said coldly, then got up and left the table. Emily sat there, staring at her plate, her stomach turning. The words replayed in her mind, "None of your business." But how could it not be? This was her father's house, the home he promised would always be her safe place. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small, dim room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and Diane's footsteps down the hall. She thought about her dad, how he'd always planned ahead, how careful he was with every detail. It didn't make sense that Diane was suddenly the one in charge of everything. The next morning, Emily noticed new locks on more doors, the garage, the basement, even some cabinets. Diane claimed it was for safety, but Emily knew better. She was being shut out, little by little. As she left for work that day, Emily looked back at the house. The curtains were drawn, and for the first time, it didn't feel like home. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And no matter how much Diane tried to hide it, Emily could feel it in her bones. There was something inside that locked study that Diane didn't want her to. It was a Saturday morning when Diane's son, Jake, showed up with 2 large suitcases and a lazy grin. He walked into the house like he owned it, tossing his things right in the living room. Diane hugged him tightly and said, "Welcome home, honey." Those words made Emily's stomach twist. Home. This wasn't his home. From that day, everything started to fall apart even more. Jake was in his mid-20s, but acted like a spoiled teenager. He didn't have a job, didn't even try to find one. Every morning, while Emily rushed to work half awake, Jake slept until noon. When she came back, he'd be sitting on the couch playing video game, surrounded by empty soda cans and pizza boxes. Diane treated him like a prince. She cooked for him, washed his clothes, and gave him spending money. Meanwhile, she still expected Emily to pay rent every month, never missing a day. Emily kept her frustration to herself. She didn't want to give Diane another reason to kick her out, but it hurt to see how unfair it all was. One evening, Emily came home after a long shift. The house smelled like beer and fried food. Music was blasting, and Jake's friends were laughing in the living room. Diane was sitting with them, drinking wine, pretending everything was fine. Emily quietly walked to her room, closed the door, and sat on her bed, trying to hold back tears. Late that night, when the noise finally stopped, Emily went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed by the hallway, she heard voices coming from the dining room. Diane and Jake were talking quietly. Jake's voice was full of excitement. "Once we sell this place, we'll be set," he said, chuckling. Emily froze. The words hit her like a punch. Diane's tone was lower, cautious. "Keep your voice down. She might hear you." Her heart started racing. "Sell the house." She felt her hands shaking as she stood in the dark, listening. Jake continued. "It's about time, Mom. The market's good. We could get a lot for it." Diane sighed. "I just need her to move out first. Then everything will go smoothly." Emily backed away quietly, her pulse pounding in her ears. So that was it. Diane had been pretending all along. The rent, the attitude, the locked rooms. It was all part of her plan. She wasn't just being cruel. She was preparing to take everything her father left behind. Emily lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. The house suddenly felt like a trap. Every corner held secrets she hadn't seen before. The woman she had tried to believe was just grieving was, in truth, greedy and heartless. By morning, Emily knew one thing for sure. She couldn't just sit back anymore. If Diane was planning to sell her father's home, Emily had to find a way to stop her. No matter how hard it would be, she had to protect what was hers. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what she'd overheard that night. Every word kept echoing in her mind. Diane and Jake wanted to sell the house, the home her father built, the one he promised would always belong to her. She tried to focus at work, but her hands kept trembling whenever she remembered Diane's voice saying, "I just need her to move out first." That week, she came up with a plan. She couldn't confront Diane yet, not without proof. But she remembered her father's old lawyer, Mr. Turner, a kind man who had handled most of her dad's business affairs. Emily decided to contact him, though she knew she had to be careful. If Diane found out, she'd twist things again. So, Emily called his office, pretending she needed her father's records for a college scholarship form. Mr. Turner sounded surprised but friendly. "Of course, Emily," he said. "Your father was a good man. I'll see what I can find." 2 days later, she visited his office during her lunch break. Mr. Turner was an older man with kind eyes and a calm voice. He brought out a thin brown folder with her father's name neatly typed on the front. "I'm glad you reached out," he said. "Your father left everything in order." Emily's heart started to race as he opened the folder. Inside were several documents, neatly arranged, old letters, insurance papers, and finally, the property deed. Mr. Turner slid it toward her. "This might interest you," he said. Emily read the document slowly, her eyes moving over every word. Her hands began to shake when she reached the section that said, "Transfer of ownership, from Robert Hayes to Emily Hayes." The date was 6 months before her father had passed away. She blinked several times, thinking she'd misread it. But it was clear. The house was already hers. She looked up, stunned. "Mr. Turner, are you saying my father gave me the house before he died?" He nodded. "Yes. He wanted to make sure you'd always have a safe home. He was very specific about it." Emily felt her chest tighten. "Then why has Diane been acting like she owns it?" Mr. Turner frowned. "I can't speak for her, but she must have hidden this. You were the rightful owner all along." Emily sat there in silence, tears burning in her eyes. The truth hit her hard. Diane had lied, manipulated her, and made her pay rent for something that was legally hers. All that time, while Emily struggled to survive, Diane had been sitting on this secret. Mr. Turner gently handed her a certified copy of the deed. "Keep this safe, Emily," he said. "You may need it soon." She nodded, clutching the paper tightly in her hands. As she stepped out of the office, the air felt different. For the first time in months, she wasn't scared. She was angry, but also strong. Diane had stolen her peace, but now Emily held the truth, and she was ready to use it. Emily walked home from Mr. Turner's office that afternoon with the papers tucked safely in her bag. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was sharp. She finally knew the truth. The house was hers. But she couldn't let Diane find out that she knew not yet. If Diane was willing to lie for months, she would do anything to protect her secret. Emily needed to be careful. From that day, She began to watch everything more closely. Every word, every move, every phone call Diane made, Emily paid attention. She quietly started taking pictures of important mail, copying old documents, and saving text messages. Whenever Diane mentioned the house or her father's will, Emily made sure to keep a record. She even went through old boxes in the attic, pretending to look for clothes, but really searching for anything her father might have left behind. Days turned into weeks, and Diane grew restless. She started acting more impatient than usual. At breakfast one morning, she casually said, "Emily, you should start thinking about moving out soon. I might have found someone interested in buying the place." Emily looked up, pretending to be calm. "Oh, really? That's great," she said with a soft smile. "Just give me a few weeks to get things sorted." Diane smiled back, clearly satisfied, not realizing that Emily's words were part of a plan. At night, Emily sat in her room, going through the folder from Mr. Turner. She kept the original deed hidden under a loose floorboard beneath her bed. Every so often, she'd take it out just to remind herself that she wasn't powerless anymore. The house was hers, she just had to prove it at the right time. Meanwhile, Diane began showing strangers around the property. Emily would come home to find unfamiliar people walking through the halls, pointing at rooms like they were shopping. It made her furious inside, but she never showed it. She acted polite, even offered coffee once, which seemed to please Diane. Jake, on the other hand, grew more arrogant. He talked about his plans for the money they would make from the sale. "I might finally get that car," he said one night, laughing. Emily just nodded, pretending not to care, though her blood boiled. In her free time, Emily met with Mr. Turner again. She asked him about the legal process to prove ownership, and quietly began preparing the documents she would need. He assured her that once she revealed the truth, no one could take the house away. Back at home, Diane's attitude got worse. She started leaving Emily's things outside her door, making it clear she wanted her gone. "Don't take too long packing," she said one morning with a forced smile. Emily simply nodded. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "I won't." But inside, she was counting down the days, not to move out, but to end the lies. The moment was coming when Diane would finally realize she'd been outsmarted, and Emily was going to make sure she remembered it. A week later, Diane announced she was hosting a family dinner. She said it was to celebrate the new beginning, but Emily already knew what that meant, the sale of the house. Diane had been walking around with a wide smile all week, humming while cooking, and talking on the phone late at night. Every time Emily passed by, she'd catch pieces of conversation, the offer, closing soon, finally free. Emily didn't ask questions. She just nodded when Diane told her to dress nicely for dinner. Inside, her heart was beating fast. She had spent the last few days making sure every piece of proof was ready. The deed, the lawyer's confirmation, the documents showing the house was legally hers. Everything was tucked safely in her bag, waiting for the right moment. That evening, the house smelled like expensive food and perfume. Diane had gone all out. The dining table was set with candles, wine glasses, and a fancy tablecloth she'd bought just for the occasion. Jake was in high spirits, bragging to his friends about the huge money coming their way. They laughed loudly, drinking and talking as if the house was already theirs to sell. Emily sat quietly at the corner of the table, forcing a smile. Every time Diane looked her way, she acted polite and calm, pretending to be part of the celebration. Inside, though, her chest was tight. She could feel her pulse in her hands. She kept thinking of her father, of everything he'd worked for, and how Diane was sitting there celebrating selling his home, her home. During dinner, Diane raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said proudly. "It's been a long road, but things are finally turning around for us. Money's finally coming in." Everyone cheered. Jake added, "And about time, too. I can't wait to see that check." Emily's throat tightened, but she didn't say a word. She just looked at Diane, the woman who had lied to her, taken her money, and tried to steal her father's house. There was a flicker of satisfaction in Diane's eyes, like she thought she'd finally won. Emily glanced around the table at the laughter, the fake smiles, the greed filling the room. Then she looked down at her bag resting beside her chair. Her plan was simple, and tonight it would finally happen. She had waited patiently, gathering every bit of evidence without letting Diane suspect a thing. When dessert was served, Diane leaned over and said sweetly, "I hope you've started packing, Em. We'll be closing the deal very soon." Emily smiled faintly. "Yes, I've been getting everything ready," she replied softly. Diane didn't notice the meaning behind her words, but Emily did. She had everything she needed to turn the night around, to finally show Diane the truth she'd been hiding. And as the laughter echoed through the dining room, Emily sat quietly, knowing that soon, everything would change. The morning after the dinner, Emily was getting ready for work when she heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. Before she could turn around, Diane burst into her room, her face red with anger and panic. She was holding a stack of papers, gripping them so tightly that her hands shook. "Sign this," Diane demanded, her voice sharp. Right now. Emily looked up from where she sat on the edge of her bed. What is it? She asked quietly, though she already had a feeling. It's a release form, Diane snapped. It says you give up any claim to this house. You'll still get something from the sale, of course, but this will make the process smoother. Emily took the papers from her hand, pretending to read them carefully. The words on the page confirmed what she expected. It was a legal trick. If she signed, she'd lose everything her father had left her. For a moment, she stayed silent, letting Diane think she was considering it. Diane started pacing, muttering, "We don't have time for this. The buyers are waiting. Just sign it, Emily, and we'll both move on with our lives." Emily folded the papers slowly and set them on her lap. Then she looked up at Diane with calm eyes and said, "You might want to read your mail first." Diane froze. "What are you talking about?" Emily stood up, walked to her desk, and picked up a sealed envelope. She had been waiting for this moment since the day she left Mr. Turner's office. The letter had arrived the evening before, but she'd kept it hidden. She handed it to Diane. "It's from Mr. Turner," she said softly. "Dad's lawyer." Diane hesitated, but tore open the envelope anyway. As her eyes moved across the page, the color drained from her face. The letter clearly stated that Emily Hayes was the sole legal owner of the property. Every right, every document, every title, all belonged to her. Emily watched her carefully. "You lied to me," she said quietly. "You took money from me, tried to sell the house, and made me feel like I didn't belong here. But this proves you never had control over anything." Diane's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her hands trembled as she stared at the letter, reading it again and again, as if the words might change. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Your father would never." "He did," Emily interrupted gently. "He made sure I'd always have a home. He trusted you, and you betrayed that." Diane's eyes filled with panic. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," Emily said, her voice firm. "You thought you could get away with it." For a long moment, the room was silent except for Diane's shaky breathing. She finally dropped the papers onto the floor and backed away slowly. Emily didn't move. She just stood there, calm and unshaken, as Diane turned and walked out of the room without another word. For the first time in months, Emily felt peace. The truth was out, and this time, Diane had nowhere left to hide. Diane stood frozen in the middle of the room, the letter still shaking in her hand. Her eyes moved back and forth over the words as if she could somehow make them disappear. Her lips trembled. That's impossible," she whispered. "There has to be a mistake." Emily didn't raise her voice. She just looked at her calmly and said, "It's not a mistake, Diane. Dad made sure I'd always have a home, one that no one could take away." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy. Diane finally lowered the letter, her eyes wide and empty. She looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. The walls, the furniture, everything she had treated like her own. The truth hit her all at once. She hadn't been the owner. She had been living rent-free in a house that didn't belong to her. Emily could see the realization wash over her. Diane's face turned pale, and her hands fell to her sides. You knew," she stuttered. "I found out recently," Emily said softly, "but I wanted to be sure before saying anything." Diane stepped back, shaking her head. "Your father didn't tell me about this. He promised we'd share everything." Emily took a slow breath. "Maybe he did, but he also knew what kind of person you were. He wanted me to be safe, and now I understand why." Diane's jaw tightened. "You can't just kick me out. I've lived here for years. I took care of this place." Emily looked her straight in the eyes. "No, Diane, you took care of yourself. You lied, you took my money, and you tried to sell what wasn't yours. This house is mine, and deep down you always knew it." Diane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her confidence, the arrogance she carried for months, was gone. The woman who once ordered Emily around now looked small, defeated, and lost. She clutched the letter again, her hands trembling. "You tricked me," she said weakly. Emily shook her head. "No, you tricked yourself. You thought you could use me, but you forgot who you were dealing with." Diane took another step back and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked like someone who had just realized her whole plan had fallen apart. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the door, but she didn't move. She knew there was no escaping the truth now. Emily stood quietly, watching her. Part of her wanted to feel sorry for Diane, but she couldn't. Not after everything she had done. Instead, she felt a strange calm, a quiet strength she hadn't known she had before. Finally, Emily said, "You'll need to start packing soon. I'll give you a little time, but this house isn't yours anymore." Diane didn't argue. She just sat there, pale and speechless, realizing she had lost everything: the money, the control, and the home she thought she owned. Diane didn't say a word for the rest of that morning. She stayed quiet, avoiding Emily's eyes, moving slowly through the house like a stranger. The letter from Mr. Turner lay on the kitchen table, the final proof of everything she had tried to hide. Emily knew what needed to happen next. She waited until evening before calling Diane into the living room. When Diane walked in, her face was pale, her steps uncertain. Emily stood by the window, holding a small box that contained her father's will and the property deed. Her voice was steady. "You have 1 week to move out," she said simply. "After that, I'll have to take legal action." Diane's mouth opened in disbelief. "A week? Emily, that's not fair. Where are we supposed to go?" Emily didn't flinch. "You should have thought about that before trying to sell a house that wasn't yours," she said quietly. "I've already spoken to the lawyer. I'm giving you more time than you gave me." Just then, Jake entered the room, holding a soda can and looking annoyed. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between them. Diane hesitated. "She wants us to leave," she muttered. Jake scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Leave? This is our house too." Emily turned to face him, her voice calm but firm. "No, Jake. It's my house. You've lived here without paying a single dime, making a mess while I work 2 jobs to keep things running. Maybe it's time you learned what rent really feels like." Jake's expression changed instantly. He looked from Emily to his mother, expecting Diane to defend him, but she said nothing. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the floor. The power she once carried was gone. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted completely. The laughter and noise from Jake's friends stopped. The once busy kitchen was quiet. Boxes began to pile up near the hallway as Diane packed her things in silence. Emily stayed out of their way, giving them space but keeping her distance. She spent her evenings cleaning out her father's old office, the one Diane had kept locked for months. It was dusty and untouched, but it felt peaceful to be in there again. On the 7th day, Diane came to Emily's door. Her eyes were tired and her voice was low. "We're leaving," she said. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for it to go this far." Emily looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "I hope you find peace, Diane, but you can't build your life by taking from others." Diane gave a weak smile but didn't respond. She turned and walked away. Emily stood by the window as the car pulled out of the driveway. Jake sat in the passenger seat, his head turned toward the house until they disappeared down the road. The silence that followed was strange but comforting. For the first time in a long while, the house felt like hers again, steady, quiet, and safe. Months passed, and the house finally felt like home again. The rooms that once carried tension now carried peace. Emily spent her weekends fixing small things, polishing the wooden floors, painting the walls, and replacing the old curtains. She wanted to bring life back into the place her father had built with so much love. Every corner reminded her of him, but instead of sadness, she now felt comfort. One afternoon, she walked into her father's study, the room Diane had once kept locked. Sunlight streamed through the window, landing softly on the desk where her father used to write. Emily had cleaned the shelves, arranged his books in neat rows, and placed his favorite mug beside a small plant. It looked warm and alive again. She held the old family photo in her hands, her father's gentle smile, her younger self sitting beside him, both happy and free. With care, she placed it in a new frame and hung it on the wall, right beside the property deed that proved the house was truly hers. Standing there, she whispered, "You kept your promise, Dad. This will always be my safe place." The words felt like closure. She realized that she didn't need revenge, anger, or shouting to win. She had already won the moment she took back what was rightfully hers. Diane and Jake were gone, but Emily didn't wish them harm. She hoped they had learned something, that taking what isn't yours always comes with a price. Emily's life slowly began to change. Without the constant stress, she focused on her work, started saving again, and even began taking online classes her father once encouraged her to pursue. On quiet evenings, she would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunset touch the same trees her father used to admire. It reminded her that peace doesn't come from fighting. It comes from letting go of what tried to break you. Sometimes neighbors would stop by, curious about what happened to Diane. Emily never spoke badly of her. She'd simply smile and say, "Things worked out the way they were meant to." Deep down, she knew the truth, that strength isn't loud. It's quiet, calm, and steady, like her father had been. On her father's birthday, Emily placed fresh flowers on his study desk and lit a small candle beside his picture. She sat for a long time, thinking about everything she had gone through. Losing him had been the hardest thing, but surviving the betrayal that followed made her stronger than she ever imagined. As the candle flame flickered gently, Emily smiled. She didn't just get the house back, she got herself back. The pain, the lies, the fear, all of it had faded. What remained was peace, a sense of belonging, and the quiet joy of knowing that she had honored her father's last wish. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need to be cruel. Sometimes it's just reclaiming what was already yours and standing tall while the guilty face the truth they can't escape. Broken Heart Sparkles.